So I don't know if you guys remember, but Justine van Heerden spoke earlier in the week about her traveling museum. And my master's project also falls under HARP. Um, as she explained, HARP's objectives is basically to expand on known forager sequences, though that is not like widely known. Foragers in Southern Africa have been mostly overlooked when you relate the information that you have of farmers, herders, and all those types of things. So HARP's objectives is to expand on known forager sequences. It's to investigate new ideas about foragers and what roles they might have played that we never even thought about. So my research is basically to try and situate foragers within the larger trade economies that were occurring across the landscape. So I'm focusing on trade and exchange, and then trying to see and trying to understand also the socio-economic relations that came about due to these different exchange networks and trade networks. So, okay, trade around the world has had a significant influence on past economic, political, and social structures. In Central Southern Africa, in Central Southern Africa's Middle Limpopo Valley, such changes have been seen alongside the region's participation in international trade networks along the East African coastline. As these new international trade relations expanded, trade wealth items began to appear more abundantly across the landscape. This included items such as metal, glass beads, ceramics, and porcelain. These items were highly valued due to the skills needed to produce them, their scarcity, and the reflection of status, power, and wealth. It was because of this reflection that individuals began to accumulate and monopolize these wealth items. By doing so, these individuals created opportunities in which they could secure political power within their communities. In turn, by accumulating and monopolizing these items, they contributed towards the creation and maintenance of class differentiation, elite identities, and social political complexity within farmer communities. So because farmer centers were more actively involved with international trade and the after effects thereof, most studies have primarily focused on these centers in relation to trade networks across the Middle Limpopo Valley. But if we want a complete understanding of trade relations and economies, we cannot exclude indigenous forager groups. Cultural material found at several rock shelters across the landscape, including Little Muck Shelter, indicate that resident forager groups were active participants within these larger economies. The Little Muck Shelter is where most of my research has been done so far. The shelter has an opening that measures approximately 12 meters in length and has a depth ranging from 2 to 4 meters. There is a rock column in the center of the shelter, creating two openings that go deeper into the recess of the kopje. To the west of this column, the back wall nearly levels onto the shelter's floor, creating very shallow deposits, while to the east, the back wall forms a steep drop to the floor level. Originally, the shelter was excavated by Hall and Smith in 2000, but they had a limited sequence and their chronology was based on relative dating alone. For this purpose, renewed excavations began in 2020 under HARP for the purpose of expanding on the known sequence of the site and acquiring new charcoal samples that we can use to obtain radiocarbon dates with. But more than that, the shelter hinted at interesting trade patterns that could inform us of forager-farmer social interactions and relations, both before and during the Mapungubwe period, as well as the role that foragers most likely occupied within the larger social, political, and economic landscape. So with these graphs, I will be explaining them in 3 phases. So the pre-contact period, which is the phase between VDG and VDB. So the stratigraphic units represent the pre-contact period. So this period at Little Muck is succeeded by variable frequencies of stone tools, ostrich eggshell, ochre, worked bone, achatina shell, and bone foodways. The intensification of stone tool production suggests that production processes started to occur at the shelter from the early 1st millennium AD, and this was most likely for personal use within the community. This intensification, along with the higher frequency of other forager-associated materials such as ochre, faunal remains, and shell, suggests that this was a period of intense occupation. In the following phase, which is 900 AD to about 1000 AD, this is represented by PBG1 to B2. So that's the period from 900 to 1000 AD. So during this period, an increased farmer occupation is noted within the Middle Limpopo Valley, meaning that forager spaces became more confined and access to resources more limited. This led to more direct relations occurring between foragers and farmers, as can be seen through an increase in stone tool production, faunal remains, shell material, and other artifact densities. This intense increase of artifact densities parallel to the appearance of glass beads and ceramic materials suggests that surplus goods were produced as a means of trading with farmers. Some have argued that foragers may have provided farmers with certain services, such as the working of skins and ivory. In turn, foragers may have received compensation in the form of glass beads and ceramics, and metal objects. The idea of surplus goods among Little Muck's forager community and possible compensation implies that these foragers were actively involved within farmer economies. And after 1000 AD, so that's stratigraphic units GB1 to GB3, so after this period, there is an increase, or during this period, there is an obvious decrease in items relating to forager craft production and trade. It was thought that the rise of social political complexity and the centralization of economic structures among farmer communities pushed foragers to the edge of local trade economies. It was further argued that as foragers became more marginalized, farmers appropriated the shelter for ritual purposes. However, a continuity in forager-associated items was noted throughout the assumed appropriation of the shelter, though the numbers were very small. Okay, so overall, our findings based on materials gathered from the active excavation units, as can be seen in the square on the right, our findings revealed a greater number and variability of trade wealth items at Little Muck in relation to surrounding shelter sites. It also revealed an intense forager involvement in production processes and farmer trade economies at the onset thereof, and the possibility that foragers might have been accumulating trade wealth, though we are unsure how exactly they would have used this trade wealth, or in what respect, or how they would have viewed it. So essentially from the mid-1st millennium AD to about 1000 AD, Little Muck functioned as an active trade center. After this period, evidence shows an economic shift from Little Muck Shelter to Leogwe Hill, which is a farmer settlement about 1.5 kilometers south of Little Muck. Evidence also showed a shift in craft production from a forager shelter to a farmer a farmer homestead. And lastly, the evidence also showed the possible abandonment of forager settlement structures in favor of farmer homesteads. These 3 points of evidence form the basis of my master research, in which I am examining assemblages from both Little Muck Shelter and Leoquia Hill in order to assess shifts in craft production sites, trade wealth, and craft items, as well as economies, in order to broaden our understanding of the relationship between people and places during the rise of state-level society across the Middle Limpopo Valley. I just like to thank all the sponsors. So the NRF PAST, I'd like to thank SANParks for giving us, allowing us to work here, and then the universities. And thank you to all the HARP members who have helped me throughout my research. Yep, thank you.